We are live. Kira,
Yes,
episode 48. Geoff and Kira live. How you doing?
I'm good. I just realized we're going to hit 50 episodes before the year end.
Yeah, pretty incredible.
Actually, our last episode of the year will be number 50, right?
Yes, it should be number 50. Will be the last one of the year. Yeah,
I feel
that's
like it's a lucky thing. End in the zeros, you know?
like we'll be at a perfect 50. Um, yeah, at the
Yeah,
end of the year, and it's funny because it was around 25. We're doing like 25 a year is the pace so
right.
far. So it's been a couple of years. So we're
How are you? How are you handling lockdown city?
I mean, it's just been exhausting because people are not happy about both situations from everything that's happening with the pandemic itself to the health problems. Obviously, all the just people sick and the death and that side of it's tragic, and then you have the side of it with people with their jobs and not having jobs, and the economic side and their mental health and all of that. It's just really um, taking a toll, I think, on everybody. I mean, this isn't anything surprising. I mean, we all know that it's affecting people very
How
deeply,
are you? Are you
tragic
doing
things.
well?
As far as health wise or
Mentally,
mentally,
yeah, just mentally handling it.
I'm doing fine. Except I think it makes my
Far
I
as
think
health wise,
I think it makes my ADD worse. To be honest.
really?
Yeah, I think it makes it kind of accelerates, but like my ADHD is harder manage at times. Uh,
Because it's too much noise everywhere.
yeah, I don't know. I don't know what it is. I think it kind of set off everybody's mental health in different ways, and people get depressed, get or everything's kind of accelerated, and kind of the thing I've always had is ADHD, which is a whole other topic, an interesting topic sometimes. Anyway. Um,
Yeah.
it really is. You know, my brain just constantly wants like looking for something interesting, looking for interesting things, and so it's really good at like finding what's the shiniest thing happening. But the problem
Right.
is, in its search for everything interesting, it forgets to do the mundane stuff. So, like,
Right.
stuff like paying bills and it just the more boring stuff gets. And this happens to everybody, but the ADHD it's like 10 times worse because
Yeah.
it's hard to just do it's hard to just. It's. I mean, if you do like one little thing, it's like a massive accomplishment. If you do one little thing in a day, that would be insane. But at the same time, we're also able to hyper focus on things like superhuman focus. So it's a kind of a thing of extremes. But I definitely noticed the pandemic has made that. But other than that, I'm doing great. I mean, I'm doing great health wise. I think everything's sad that's happening. But myself personally, I'm doing all right. If I can fight off the daily ADHD side of things. Uh,
Well, stay sane over there on the West Coast, and
we've
yeah.
discussed it many times. It's a different world in Atlanta where you are, right? From where we are, I think.
Yes.
Very different. We've covered
It's like
that.
our own little bubble here, which frankly, it's a nice reprieve
Yeah,
from crazy,
yeah.
crazy talk where you're just like constantly bombarded with COVID. And that's why today we are not going to be talking about COVID.
Correct.
We're actually talking about something much bigger in terms of technology and the future of what our platforms look like potentially.
Yes.
And that has very, very broad ramifications and consequences and pros and cons to it. So without further ado, let's get started on Facebook, the antitrust case.
Let's do it. Johan has entered the building. What's up, Johan? Let's start talking about it. I think that, to kind of break it down, I mean, yesterday there's obviously this announcement from the government that there's going to be a lawsuit against Facebook.
Right.
And we all know what's been happening just with Facebook, Twitter, all of them, YouTube, Instagram, kind of being under the microscope of the government and just people in general. I mean, we've touched on it in past episodes and watched how this has progressed, but it kind of led into this big announcement from the New York Attorney General, New York AG James, yesterday. And I'll just read what she said. She said, "Breaking, I'm leading a bipartisan coalition of 48 attorneys general in a lawsuit against Facebook to end its legal monopoly. We are taking action to stand up for the millions of consumers and many small businesses that have been harmed by Facebook's illegal behavior. Facebook has used its monopoly power to crush smaller rivals and snuff out competition, all at the expense of everyday users. Instead of improving its own product, Facebook took advantage of consumers and made billions of dollars converting their personal data into a cash cow. Today's suit should send a clear message to Facebook and every other company. Efforts to stifle competition, reduce innovation, or cut privacy protections will be met with the full force of almost every attorney general's office in the nation." That's from New York State AG.
Strongly worded, case, and it's actually the first kind of it as it pertains to the U.S. The EU has been going after Google for, before I even worked there, but for years, of all the practices they were doing, in Europe. So this is a monumental case that the government, that the FTC, so the Federal Trade Commission, has brought against a social media company.
Yeah.
And the reason why they're bringing it together is a lot of different reasons, but the biggest one is that they are buying up so many massive other social media companies like WhatsApp and Instagram. So it becomes this behemoth, and it's now essentially a monopoly. And the government has a pretty strong case that Facebook needs to unload and divest from Instagram and WhatsApp.
So what are the consequences of it here? Like what does it mean? So they have this lawsuit against Facebook. Let's just talk about Facebook for a second. What happens in this lawsuit? Like what are the consequences for Facebook as far as read or know? What could happen here? Facebook.
Yeah, for sure. So, it comes down to Facebook losing its hold and acquisitions. Every company, look at Alphabet, for example, the parent company of Google. There was never an Alphabet, 4 or 5 years ago. That's very new. It's so big that they had to create a parent company because they're acquiring so many different things into its own massive, business model.
Yeah. Yeah.
Facebook is going that direction as well, and the government is like, no. And I actually think the ramifications from this will be that Facebook will have to unload Instagram at least, and probably WhatsApp.
Unload it. What does that mean?
They'll have to sell it off.
So Instagram could get sold to somebody, and WhatsApp.
Yeah,
okay.
And it can't be like a Google or an Apple. It has to be like independently owned, and it can't be Twitter either. Really what the government's doing is like the worst thing that could possibly come down the line to these technology companies is that they're trying to break them up. They're getting too big for the britches, so to speak. and they want to get a little bit more of a handle on them. You know, the FTC has never been able to put together any laws or anything that surrounds data or privacy concerns or anything. And now this is the first attempt, a very strong attempt at bringing consumers into the field of vision to a lot of these big tech, which, you know, consumer behaviors were being extracted. You know, I think this comes down to a lot of the documentaries that we've all watched, you know, about social networks. I have to imagine that has weighed pretty heavily on the Congress, and the FTC, you know, has been pushed to make this lawsuit happen.
And so like, I know one thing you mentioned in there was one thing when Instagram combined with Facebook where there was something about the messages. I know they made like direct messages. I heard that was a big thing when Facebook combined its messages with Instagram. That was a big trigger. I wonder what something like that, why that raised a lot of eyebrows. Is that, I guess that's just a signal that Facebook's becoming even bigger because now everything's like meshed to one. I know the message thing was a big piece of it, I heard.
It was, but it's also that they're continuing to, this is a company, keep in mind, Facebook, when it first came out, said Facebook was like the cool dog in the new arena, overtaking MySpace. And it was to be this almost area where you can trust a company not to cookie you, not to track you. It promised that it wasn't going to do that, that it was going, that you know, only all your posts would only be visible to the people that are in your real life community. And, you know, all of these privacy policies have changed since the beginning. And more and more and more have they interjected themselves into consumer behavior and the way we utilize Facebook. And they use it for not the best purposes. You know, they've tried every year to come out with a new tracking pixel. In 2007, they had one where it was a beacon that would track you, and it was like fiercely debated, and, you know, completely, they had to shut it down within a year because it was just, they're putting their little, you know, octopus suckers all over the consumers that are on their site, and they're, you know, going over a line, a very distinct line as it pertains to antitrust.
So you mentioned, yeah, so when it happens though, so say like the lawsuit goes through, and what's then? Will Facebook have a different, like, what are the consequences? It won't be like shut down. It'll just have different features or something. Like, how does that work?
Facebook by far is the largest social network. You know, and I believe it touts that it's 95% of all social media is Facebook.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that's enormous. If you think about it, you know, and that's because of Instagram and WhatsApp. Now, if you break those off of Facebook, Facebook will only be siloed within their own platform, which actually isn't doing so hot and hasn't been doing very well in the younger generations. It's more of like a, you know what I liken it to? Facebook's turning into, and it has been it's been trending this way, unfortunately for them, because these are stats that they don't want to acknowledge, but they know that's happening, is that I liken it to the fact I used to work in the auto industry for 11 years, and Toyota was my main client. I remember going into the CMO and talking to him about cross-shopping and competitor analysis on their brand, Scion. And Scion, when Scion first came out, it was this edgy, cool, all the young people wanted it. They would never advertise Scions. They would only park it in front of clubs and do this like very immersive, you know, under the radar advertising. They wanted to make it like a super cool brand, you know, that not advertising in your face. However, when I would bring them data of the people that were shopping for Scion on Auto Trader at that point, as people that were empty nesters and, you know, in their 50s. And that was blowing their mind. It was making them insane because they wanted they wanted to target young people. They didn't want to be seeing older people driving an XB or an XC. You know, that made them their blood boil, you know. And I'm like, that's what the data's showing. So Facebook is turning into that. Facebook was this cool college, you know, young person's community, very hip, very cool. They acquired Instagram because they were losing the younger generations and they knew it. So they had to acquire Instagram.
And when did that happen? When did they buy Instagram? That was a few years ago?
Well, it was a few years ago. Hey, Google, when did Facebook buy Instagram?
Um,
2012.
2012. And they bought, they bought Instagram in 2012, and they bought WhatsApp in 2014.
Hey, Google, stop. God, you ask your Google Home one question, I'll tell you they'll give you a novel.
Yeah.
Just don't ask it what truffle butter is. I've warned you, don't do it.
Don't.
So, okay. And anyway.
Anyway, all right, interesting. So
so that's what happened. They're going very old. If you talk to a Gen Z, they're not on Facebook. Facebook is like for old people.
Yeah.
And that is a major fucking problem for Facebook. And that has been a major fucking problem for them for years.
Yeah.
They cannot get the younger generations. Nobody wants to be on Facebook that's under like 30, you know, or under 35.
So what this lawsuit would do then, it would change their features somehow, or like I still like what
it changes their entire dynamic. And the biggest problem for them with this is always advertising. That always comes down to advertising.
Yeah.
Because Facebook, when they go to advertisers and say, hey, would you like to buy our product? We can cookie people. We know these are the demographics that are on our site, blah, blah, blah. They don't give the demographics of Facebook. They give the demographics of Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp.
Yeah.
The minute you take Instagram and WhatsApp away, you're stuck with a really old, dodgy site.
So it hurts them in that way that they lose their young crowd.
Dude, no advertisers are going to want to touch that.
Right.
They're, you know, maybe adult diapers will want, you know, to be on it, but outside of that, or pharmaceuticals maybe, but outside of that, they will not be able to capture the advertising dollars as it pertains to, you know, millennials and Gen Y, because you won't be able to bucket them anymore in with the Instagram and the WhatsApp. You know, the demographics shift completely, which means a very, very large amount of advertising dollars will go away from Facebook.
And Lee Miller asks, do you think that Facebook will promise not to track everyone when this lawsuit goes through?
No. The reason why is because they don't have to.
Yeah.
They make money based on advertising, right? We've talked about this before, where advertising rules the world way more than anyone could possibly realize. So Facebook will do whatever the advertisers want. And what the advertisers want are to get their grubby hands all over your shopping behaviors online, whether it's legal or not. And the problem is the legality as it pertains to cookieing and pixeling and all of that kind of stuff isn't very strong.
Right.
And social media companies love that because they can track you. They can do all kinds of cool stuff because the FTC never put in any laws as it pertains to the internet. They do it on phone lines. When you use AT&T or whatever, phone lines are controlled by the FTC. Public television is controlled by the government. You can't just put whatever you want. Internet, It's the Wild West. And
Okay.
that's the part why the government, it's like, we need to start getting our hands into this. So there's no possible way that Facebook will ever go back to promising that they won't track you. It just won't happen.
Well, why? Uh, well, I think they need to in that degree. I think there needs to be some type of um, control over all of this. It's a problem because the capitalist kind of American dream and everything, is like build a company and kind of, you can like get as big as you want, like with your business and just go from them. And Facebook started in his dorm room and at Harvard, Mark Zuckerberg. So, it did kind of build, but there is kind of a cap on what you do and how you do it. And I think in this specific circumstance, it just got out of control, obviously, as we all know. And so once that happens, if the lawsuit goes through and everything goes, then obviously it's going to break away WhatsApp and Instagram. There will probably be some other things happen as well, but they're still going to be able to track, and it's still not going to, because they can track and because social media is still social media. We're still going to have the problem of there's a lot of issues right now with cancel culture and censorship and what can be put online and what can't. And I don't know that the lawsuit against Facebook really does anything for that, right? It just kind of stops them from becoming a bigger company in that way, right? Like, I don't think that, maybe it will. I don't know how it's gonna. I know there's a lot of people that are unhappy with social media and the uh, control it has over messages online and what people can say and what they can't say. And I wonder how much this lawsuit is going to affect that in any way, if at all. I don't know what
Yeah,
it's going to do to that.
I think it's actually a really good point to make because there's several things that will come out of this lawsuit. And let's say it completely gets demolished in the courts, which it won't. This is a very strong case because you have 46, 48 states that have signed on for this. So that means every single state basically is going after Facebook. And they have a lot more manpower and attorney power than Facebook could, So we're talking about the US government that's going after Facebook. So you've got that beast, right? You could just look at that being like, wow, that's going to be a kind of landmark thing. Let's say the case falls apart. This has still put Google, Twitter, all the other massive big techs on notice. Apple, they're next. The government's starting Facebook because they're their easiest target because they do things that are a little shifty, but not illegal. The next line, it's going to be a domino effect. I guarantee you, Jack and Sundar, at Google and at Twitter, all of them are reviewing with their lawyers right now. You better believe they're on some serious calls right now about, okay, what does this mean for us? Because this isn't just going to stop with Facebook. So we're going to start to see the government trying to get their hands in and break these companies apart.
Yeah.
And on top of that, there's the other issue, is freedom of expression is now being targeted. So when the internet was created and exploded on the scene, you could literally do whatever you wanted. And it's almost a disservice to humanity that they allowed the Pandora's box to be opened, and now they're trying to close it back in. So it was like, okay, you can freedom express yourself all over the internet. That's where you can actually be you and have a voice and say whatever you want. Now you can't. YouTube is cracking down. You can't say certain things on YouTube or you're going to be demonetized or your videos taken down. You can't talk about anti-vaccination. You can't talk about a lot of stuff on YouTube. They've changed their privacy policies. Facebook, same thing. They changed their privacy policies.
Yep.
Instagram obviously is owned by Facebook. So there's an infringement going on in that I feel that our freedom of expression is starting to be pulled apart one brick at a time. And the more the government gets involved, and this is the problem, you've got the dichotomy here, good thing, yes, big tech needs to be broken up a little bit. Bad thing is the government's going to get in there and be like, okay, you can't say X, Y, and Z on the internet. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is communist China. So that's the only thing that I'm a little concerned about, is that because these companies cannot seem to police their own networks, the government will do it for them. So that's not what anybody wants, because we're talking about some serious suppression.
Yeah, I agree. But the problem is, so it's an issue of, do we want the companies controlling freedom of speech, or do we want the government controlling freedom of speech? Because it sounds like both aren't a very good idea. Like both are a problem.
The problem is there's, this has been cooking in, the kitchen for a while.
Yeah.
There's a reason why Mark Zuckerberg and Jack, more so the two of them than Sundar from Google, but that's why they have been hauled into congressional meetings so much over the past few years, because the government's like, what are you guys doing? You're not doing enough to control hate speech. You've built these companies, maybe not knowing that you are controlling people's mindsets, and now you're you're doing all kinds of pixeling, and you're warping their sense of reality, and the government's like, hey, what are you going to do? Are you going to fix this? And
which
Mark,
is good, right? That they challenge them on that. Yeah.
And Mark has always responded at these congressional hearings like, yes, we're doing, our job is not to police the internet, blah, blah, blah. They take a very, which is fair, is in terms of like, Google is not there to police what goes on. Yes, they have filters of like, certain things, but the government is asking private companies, or, I should say public companies, but not owned by the government, to police morality and, what's right, what's wrong, and specific topics and stuff. And Jack and Mark said no at first, but now they're getting a little heavy-handed with what's allowed on Twitter, because they don't want the government to come in and take it away. And that's exactly what's going on.
Wait, getting heavy-handed how? What do you mean? You mean
controlling the voice? Like you saw how Trump was getting flagged on Twitter about certain things that he was posting. He was never flagged. But Jack's doing that because he doesn't want the government to come in and do it for him.
He should be doing it less because he met with the government. Why do they think that they should do it more? Because they met with the government.
Because the government doesn't like what's going on in social media. One, the government doesn't, these congressmen, let's be honest, they're white old men who probably don't know what social media really is, and they have to have aides try and like sock puppet what social media is. Okay, so like let's just be honest with that. Secondly, all they're doing at home, you don't think they watch TV or film or movies or documentaries? This sets a very scary tactic for them, in that they don't see that Facebook and Twitter are doing enough to suppress certain topics that they feel are tipping into conspiracy-ish stuff that they feel, that the government feels. So the government is deciding what information they want us to have.
Not yet.
Well, That is what this antitrust, though, this is completely all about Facebook, obviously. However, this has all kinds of ramifications as it pertains to freedom of voice and
Mm-hmm.
speech and what that means. And you and I have talked about on here about having, either updating the US Constitution or creating a new technology constitution of some sort, because
Yeah.
this is what's going to happen.
Yeah.
Because the government's not liking how these private companies are handling it, they're going to come in.
I
And
think
deal with
that
it.
but okay, so here's my thing on it. Here's the thing on it. Yeah, like we've talked about social media constitution. I've heard Scott Adams mentioned like a social media bill of rights, which is also a good idea. But I think that the government, the companies are more the concern because they can do whatever they want. Their companies control, like they could do anything. We don't know what they're gonna do. But the government, at least, you have both sides influencing. I don't know how it works, but I'm not that good at this. But you have both sides in a variety of opinions influencing things, right? Like if Joe Biden becomes president, it's not Joe Biden just saying, I want this, I want that, and that's it. Like there's a whole Congress and both sides and Democrats and Republicans. And so you're getting a wide variety of opinions and thoughts and this stuff put in. So because our government is set up like that, as far as we know with everybody, the companies, you don't know what's happening within them. Shouldn't we, I mean,
Yeah.
Biden's president, shouldn't we fear the government less than what could happen within a company that we don't know much about? Like,
Well, I would say in response to that is, I don't think we should fear anything,
yeah,
um, because this is completely out of our control. It's more of an interesting twist in the world of tech.
huh?
And the reason why this is important for all of us to understand is that we're using it right now, and we use it on a daily basis. And it will, though it seems like it'll only affect the companies and the people in the ivory towers. It will have effects on consumers, and they may not see it right away, but they'll know when Instagram is sold off and it's a completely different entity. You'll know when you post something and either Facebook, Twitter, or the government decides to pull it down. So it's not so much a fear, it's just possibly alluding to what may be coming. And I think, to your point, the government has two different viewpoints from, different parties.
Yeah,
And that's what makes the government work so well, is that it's not just led by one party. You've got opposing arguments, which is fair. You don't really have that at these companies. They just have like we just make money.
right.
We're going to do whatever makes money. So if advertisers are asking us to track someone as they're walking down the street, we will find a way to do that in order to make that $100 million sale. Whereas the government's role is the safety of the citizens, and to say, wait, that doesn't seem right that you're tracking people as they're walking down the street, right? And that's just an example. But the government is made up of, as a bipartisan type of thing, and so is this antitrust. There's people on both sides of the aisle that have come together and said, you guys have too much power.
That's
and
a good thing. Yeah.
And we're going to take it away.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's a good or bad thing. It just is. And we will see what that looks like, in the very near future. I don't think, let's put it this way. I don't think Mark impressed Congress when he's done his hearings.
Yeah,
I think that's obvious. So I think he's pissed off a lot of people about all the shit that him and his company has done.
Yeah.
And they're going to be paying for it now. They're going to have to break up Instagram.
Yeah, and Lee Miller says I agree with Kira. It's best not to fear anything. Yeah, there's nothing there's nothing to fear but fear itself. As said that
The
was
famous Winston Churchill.
Winston Churchill. Yeah, I don't. I agree with that. I don't obviously agree. Yeah, have to.
But people can. I mean, we live in a fear of shit. You live in LA. That's all it is fear. But
Mhm.
like, we live in a fear-based reality where you could watch this, our discussion on this and be like, oh my God, I don't want the government in my, tracking what I do and telling me what I can and cannot put on the internet. It's like, no, we're not saying that. It's more of just a discussion point. So just always be wary when you watch videos or read articles or you watch, Geoff and I, it's not to scare you. It's more information and to let you know what's going on in the world and to open up perspectives. It's your job to be able to delineate and say, I'm not going to fear this. I'm just going to be aware of it because it's really interesting information for me to know. And I think that goes for a broad scale across everything,
Yeah.
not just this tech conversation. So just, you know, maybe back up the truck a little bit from the fear stuff is I guess what I'm saying to our viewers and
I
our listeners.
No, I agree. And then he asked, do you think censorship rules have gone too far online, or will they go further? I think we kind of touched on that.
But what do you
Um,
think, Geoff? I mean, you're a very big user of Twitter, and I mean, how do you feel about the censorship going on?
yeah. By the way, it's great that we do. I'm really active on Twitter and Facebook, especially. You're much more active on Instagram than I am. We kind of cover the spectrum that way,
I
which
know,
is good.
between the two of us.
Um, but what is my take just on everything? Like just on all
No,
of it?
no, on censorship. Just like, is
I
it a level of concern for you to see that Twitter's getting a little heavy-handed or YouTube in
yeah,
what you're allowed to post?
yeah. I mean, I'll say here's what I think. I think that there needs to be some type, and I've been saying this for 3 years. There needs to be some type of a system where there's a developed transparency of opinions and beliefs and belief systems from different sides, and we don't have that right now.
Right.
In the digital world, this is why the Constitution was created in 1776, because they were trying to figure that out in the real world, in the
Right.
non-digital world. But now
Right.
we've got the digital world, which is the second world. So we've got the new world online, the new world,
Right.
and we don't really have a system of sorts that everybody can agree to as to who can say what. Because, for example, I really struggle with this election stuff and all that, and they're talking about fraud and all that stuff. Like I just somebody talking about duffel bags and just it's just too much. I don't really understand any of it, frankly. So that's just my opinion on it. But the people who are saying that are a lot of people. Okay? Like a lot of people are saying that.
Mhm.
And anybody who says that a lot of people aren't saying that aren't plugged into half the world. They're in silos. So that's a lot of people. So you can't just, you know, start shutting down people for having opinions on what they have opinions on. Unless it's something illegal, or something. I mean, I think it'd have to be straight up illegal, because in this country, people have a right to a freedom of expression, and
Yeah.
if they believe that, they certainly have a right to be heard. And for any company to be shutting that down, that's not how the system is organized, and that's not how our um, constitution in the country are set up. It's people. have an opinion about things, no matter whether it's zany or whatever, like they deserve to be heard. I don't agree with a lot of things that people say online, but I would never be censoring people in that way unless there was something illegal happening. I wouldn't be censoring people in that way. And I look at like when you censor a tweet, or when you put a note on it, it's not really working for them. Well, first off, when Trump tweets whatever he tweets about, I won the election or
Right.
whatever, like who in this country is looking at that tweet and being like, "Oh my, didn't know it. Well, Trump won the election. Let's go celebrate." Nobody's doing that. Nobody on either side is being like, "Huh." Unless you, I mean, there's probably one person doing it. There's probably someone somewhere that believes that, but the vast majority are not looking at those tweets and believing that, like, oh, okay, well, settled. Like you would have to be rather tuned out with things. So who are they informing by censoring that? Because I don't think so. First of all, I don't think it really matters. I don't think they really need to do that because everybody knows on either side what's going on. So unless you're just way out of it, which maybe there are some people, I don't think that anybody is looking at that and suddenly believing what it is one way or the other. It's not changing their opinion because he says it. Now there probably is a small percentage of people doing that, but I don't think it's most people. That's the first thing. The second thing is when you do put a note on a tweet like that or something, you're bringing more attention to whatever it is you're censoring by default, because people are going to look at it more. So I don't even think it's not, if it is censoring as people call it, I don't think that it's like anti-censoring. It's going the opposite way of censoring, because censoring is now promoting. So when you put a note on it, it makes more news, and that snowballs, and then so is it really censoring, or is it just thinking you're censoring and then you're promoting? Like so I think it's quite complicated. But the bottom line of what I think is I believe that these people deserve to be heard. And if Trump were standing on Fifth Avenue and he was saying that stuff out loud, would a company come up and like put a note on his forehead? I mean, some people would.
Well,
But
the difference between him standing on a corner and versus posting it to hundreds of millions of people is the viral effect. And that is the part that Twitter, Facebook, Google, all of them, YouTube, they are starting to put the handcuffs around certain topics because that they don't want to spread for the sake of peace and tranquility in the US.
That they don't
if they were to allow 5G and anti-vaccination talk all the time, all that they realized how fast ideas spread and how influential, how people are influenced via social media. So of course they are gravely concerned about those topics that could pull down whole entire systems. Like if anti-vaccination actually really caught on, I mean, like really big deal, we wouldn't have a medical community in the US. I mean, we're talking some serious, massive things.
Let the government do it. Let the government do it. What I say. I say let the government, and I don't care if it's like, that's why we have the government. Like, I'm for Joe Biden and his staff, and bringing, for Joe, whoever the president is, like, bring in the staffs, bring in all the people, let them do it. I think a company trying to do it, it's not really their, like, stay out of it.
That's what Mark has always said. He's like, that's not my role.
Yeah.
And he's tried to do what the government wanted him to do, and Jack has tried to do what they asked, and they do it here and there, but it's not enough. And it's clear that the government wants to handle this issue now. They've realized the persuasive tactics that these companies are using for advertising or whatever else. And they're sick of it. They're sick of the voice, whatever voice is getting out there, they want to shut it down. So if it has something to do with 5G, anti-vaccinations, that scares the shit out of the US government. They don't want things like that to get out and brush fire. You know?
Wait, it scares the US government, that type of thing. But you have people within the government who are for those things as well, who are probably influencing the decisions, right?
Yeah, you know, they don't want, let's say, for example, the conspiracy theory that has a lot of backing from lots of people, not from the government, obviously, but it's a big push, has been for years, that 9/11 was set up by the government and that the towers were rigged with bombs. I mean, there's like documentaries on it that are, you know, they have leading scientists. Should that be allowed to be talked about constantly and really get like in front of people? And you have 465 million people thinking that? The government is completely freaked about shit like that. They're completely freaked about the potential that maybe the whole conspiracy theory that we didn't land on the moon is true. They don't want shit like that out there because that causes the most chaotic downfall of any country. So they have to control these specific topics. They have to control anti-vaccination. Whether it's true or not, I have no idea. But they, as a government, can't allow that out because they make too much money in the medical industry. You can't bring down the entire, and they know how Americans are, because the minute we're like, yeah, I believe that too. Yeah, I believe that too. And they're, brush fire, that's it. They won't be able to control it at that point.
I think what you have then, the problem seems to be rooted in a information velocity problem.
Yeah, correct.
Because in 1950, we didn't have you couldn't send a letter to everyone's mailbox about whatever the latest conspiracy was. Like, because of social media and the media and the internet, now these things can get out very, very quickly, and there's like no control over things anymore, and people can say whatever they want. It gets out very, very fast.
Yeah, you have all these like tools that people can use to manipulate real information.
So I think that the Bill of Rights, Digital Constitution Bill of Rights, should be looking at information velocity and how to program things so that enough information and opinions get distributed where a full spectrum is seen, so that all voices are heard, but maybe not to the point where it could like make something that's not true accelerate.
Well, so what you're talking about then is what, like, an advertising and digital advertising, when you have ads pop up,
yeah,
that you're surfing on the internet, you see an ad,
yeah.
On the back end, on the UI back end of how that ad is served to you, there's a frequency cap put on, and it's toggled up or down depending on if you're short of your goal of hitting how many impressions you want to hit. So you can cap a frequency level of like, okay, you only show that ad 4 times in a day to the same person, or 10 times, or 2 times. You're saying to put a frequency cap on information so that it doesn't cause the same effect that information does right now, where it's this constant push of the same manipulative type of information, and our brain brain patterns are changed based on repetition. So if you're constantly seeing the same thing over and over again, like Los Angeles with COVID, you're going to turn into the most fearing person on planet Earth, and that's what's going on in LA. So I actually think that's a really interesting idea, is to frequency cap information.
Hmm.
You know, to make sure that the brain has time to process it before it takes it on as fact.
Because I think that when they created the initial Constitution, all of this was considered, except they were missing one variable because they didn't need it, which was speed of velocity of information.
Right. Right. Yeah,
Velocity
they
of information. That
yeah,
variable was missing when they did it, whenever, 300 years ago. So it's like creating it, but creating it with like everything still applies. You just have to throw in that new variable and figure out how to weigh things on all sides to, and someone's saying, okay, we have people commenting now, someone's saying thought police. I don't know about the thought police, because it's going to be a thing for the people, it's going to be a thing where all sides are weighed, and they probably were saying thought police when they created the initial Constitution. There's probably some thought police going on there, but I think if it were created somehow around velocity where everybody gets heard, everybody gets heard, but where one thing can't just overwhelm everybody so they don't see everything else.
well,
You have to let everybody see everything. That's the key.
Yeah, I agree.
People have to see you have to show them everything. People are in such silos that they don't see everything. So they don't know, so things are sprung on them. So like when I post on Twitter and Facebook and stuff, I'm doing my very best to make sure everybody sees as much as I can possibly give them, within reason, like the reasonable stuff, because I think that the most damaging thing is for a brain to only be in a silo and just seeing one thing. And I think that's what the news used to do. They got out of that business, but I don't disagree with them necessarily for getting out of that business, because it's now the only way for them to be profitable. So you need a new system online developed of some type that is like what was created in 1776, but in the digital world, and I think it revolves around information velocity. Like I think that's the key. I think that's the key to the whole thing.
I think that's fair. And I see a few comments where, transparency is needed. And I agree. I think the lack of transparency as it pertains to a lot of the most recent stuff that this country and globally have been dealing with, such as, the pandemic, has been incredibly damaging, because we didn't know what was going on, and nobody was telling us what was going on because they probably didn't know, or they didn't want to tell the US what was going on, or whatever. So people were just flying off the handle and making up their own information from wherever they were getting their information from.
Right.
And to your point, that shit spreads like a wildfire. Well, I heard my friend works at the CDC, and they told me, I mean, that times a million, when it comes to information on the internet. So it's, I think there has to be some sort of cap, some sort of thing where one idea cannot supersede all the others. It has to be, quote unquote, fair and balanced. There has to be some sort of system, and to Lee's question is like, do you think they'll all be heard? And it's like, no, of course not. I don't think that's even possible. I think we can try, at least. Right now, the biggest voice are the advertisers, if you can believe it. You would think like, oh, well, Trump has a big voice. No, it's always the advertisers.
But
so,
I don't want to interrupt, but also, Lee Miller, yeah, you're asking. Hi, everybody. Hi, Angela, Jordan. Hi, River. Hi, favorite people in here. You're asking, will people be heard? Right now, people are more heard than any time in history. We're more heard now than ever because of social media. Everybody has a voice. Somebody can tweet something, and I'm not saying this is a good thing or bad thing, but the president just can retweet anybody. Like, we're more heard right now than ever because of velocity of information. I think you're actually more heard than ever before. Like, how were people heard in 1925? Well, nobody was really heard except the government. People just lived their lives and watched the news, and you certainly weren't heard outside of your job and your family, and that was it. So if you're concerned about being heard, you should have seen life 30 years ago. You weren't heard at all. Am I wrong?
No, I mean, I think anyone can be heard. It's the matter of technology.
Yeah.
The difference is technology. The spreader of information has just become much different than it was in the 20s. Frankly, to be honest, the roaring 20s sound kind of nice right now.
Yeah.
Information overload. Like someone just opened the can of worms and can't put them back in the can. You know what I mean? Like, there's too much information. So there needs to be a control of some sort of the information. But then you say control, and you put the word government in the same sentence, and people will literally freak the fuck out. I mean, that's civil war right there.
It is. Isn't it? People freak out about that.
Oh, that will be a war against the government. So the government has to tread very lightly with this, because they can't tell, they want to keep the freedoms, of course, and the founding fathers of this entire country. However, there needs to be someone who is concerned about the well-being of the citizens and who can control the damaging information that could affect everyone's life. How do you do that and not have government control over that? Because the government's job is to be of the concern of the people. And if they see that social media or these big tech companies are, stepping over the line in terms of all kinds of crazy shit that's out there, they have to take control of it. They don't have a choice. I don't know. It's going to be really interesting. I think 2021 is going to be the year where we're going to see some serious changes when it comes to big tech. I mean, it's when the internet first started, we had all these various companies, AltaVista and Excite.com and Ask Jeeves. I mean, it was big, and now it's gone to here, and I think it's going to start to get like in the middle.
Yeah.
I think that's good. I think we need more independent companies, to have these conglomerates are just like unbelievable, these monopolies on things.
I think it's a step, something else with them filing the lawsuit. It'd be interesting to see what happens with that. I think that there's going to need to be some type, I think we agree on that there has to be some type of a digital, call it Bill of Rights, Constitution, or whatever people want to call it, but something needs to be developed so that there's a, I hate to say control, like I think that's a bad word, but
fair and balanced. Only
a balanced. Only what?
The fair and balanced we can't use, because that'll bring up like Fox News type of stuff. But I think a balanced, equal amount of information spread amongst the people.
Yes, so that things are heard. And so we're missing that for the digital realm, but I think it will come for this new world, and I think that step by step, it's process. This was great. We had a good chat. Hour today, Kira.
Chat. I think this is gonna be really interesting next year. I think it's something, yes, COVID's on everyone's brain and now the vaccine, but There's other things in the world going on. There's other things in the US going on. And
Yeah.
that is not to diminish the severity of COVID or the loss of life, by no means. However, it's good to get out of just one topic because there are other topics and other discussion points that are actually really valid to go through and go through the details of it and have a healthy discussion. So thank you for everyone for tuning in and all for all your comments. You guys are awesome, and thank you, Geoff.
Many more to come. Thank you, Angela, Lee, Johan, everybody who was in there. Next week, episode 49, we're going to get 50 before the year ends. We'll be at a perfect 50, end of 2020. 2021 is just going to rock and roll with things. So we'll be going weekly here on Thursdays. Here at Geoff and Kira Live, we're the future, and the future is Geoff and Kira Live. Kira, I will see you next week for more fun.
I'll see you next week, Geoff. Enjoy.
Thank you, everyone. Later.